Hello and welcome into another episode of the Fantasy Football Forecast. I'm your host, Trevor Scott, joined by my co-host, Matt Giraldi.
What's going on, guys?
And today we are going to be getting into a couple beat the waiver wire options, right? So these are guys that are going to be less than 30 or less than 50% rostered, and guys that aren't necessarily going to be like the high desire, or they should be on everybody's waiver wire unless there's something weird going on. And the goal with these guys is players that we think have a lot of potential to be valuable down the line. And in weeks that are coming up, they could be high priority ads. So the first guy we're going to talk about, we're going to go quarterback, running back, receiver, tight end, and then a DST for you guys. So the first guy we're going to talk about from the quarterback position is Tyler Huntley. He signed to the Dolphins practice squad. They went and got him off of the Ravens practice squad. And I think Skylar Thompson's going to play this week, but I do think that Tyler Huntley, as he gets a little bit more of a command of the playbook, could easily step into this starting role as soon as next week. And we've seen him be very successful. He's still young, at 26 years old, but he started games 3 years ago, and he was very successful on the ground. A lot of rushing upside here with him, which, as you can tell with some of these lower end quarterbacks, any rushing production can kind of push you into that top 20. So he had multiple 70-yard rushing games 3 seasons ago, and then 2 seasons ago when he went in for Lamar over the last half of the year. He also rushing all over the place, averaged 8.5 attempts a game. Not a big passer, but I think with the Dolphins' weapons, it can help elevate his passing upside here too. So if he does get it going on the ground, they have 3 kind of elite options in Hill, Waddle, and then Achane out of backfield and lined up in the slot quite a bit. So I think the passing upside could be there for Huntley if he could just facilitate it. And I do think he can keep this offense on track with his mobility.
Yeah, and Mike was so good at calling a run game specifically. So I think him alongside Devon Achane with the zone read play, quick slants to Waddle and Tyreek. Obviously, I think we could see a very efficiently run offense with, like what you said, the rushing upside. So take a look at how Skylar Thompson plays this week. If Seattle just holds him at bay, there's a very good chance that he is going to be coming in after this. So like you said, there's too much upside in your SuperFlex leagues if you're hurting at quarterback, if you lost Tua, if you've got Matthew Stafford, who's missing his weapons and has a beat up offensive line, it could be a good speculative ad. And a lot of these guys that we're going to talk about, for example, if you had, let's say, David Njoku on your team or George Kittle on your team, and you can move those guys to an IR spot and you've got an empty bench spot, these are the type of guys that you want to be adding that are next to no risk at all.
Next guy we're going to get into here at the running back position. We're going to have 2 running backs for you here. This is generally the position that maybe is a little bit more sought after, so we wanted to talk about 2 options here. The first being Khalil Herbert. There were 2 situations last year where the starter did not start well, kind of fizzled off, and by mid-season, they just weren't valuable at all. And that was Miles Sanders got overtaken by a more talented Chuba Hubbard, and Damian Pierce got overtaken by a more talented Devin Singletary. The situation that feels the most like that this season is with DeAndre Swift in Chicago. He has been horrible through 2 games. He should be better this week against Indy. But if he's not, and then it just continues to linger with the Rams, I could see more and more and more calls for Khalil Herbert to start taking back this starting role from Swift. And they have a week 7 bye, right? So if it kind of starts to see a little bit more of a snap share between the 2, I could see a situation where by week 8, when they come out of their bye against Washington, that Khalil Herbert is just the starter here. And we've seen him over his 3 seasons be actually a very productive running back in the league. He's dealt with a little bit of injuries, but he is very, very talented on the ground. He's going to leave a lot to be desired in the receiving game, but he has averaged 5 yards a carry the last 2 seasons. And I do think this is somebody that has the talent and just doesn't have the role right now. So this is somebody that you want to be trying to get onto your team sooner than later, I think. And if he's available in your league, I might try and leave him on the waiver wire too, like maybe add one of these other guys, because once you pick him up, I think other owners are going to be like, oh, wait, Khalil Herbert, I forgot about him. Oh, wait, what is going on with Swift? Why did he add Khalil Herbert? All right. And then if you do end up cutting him because you need the spot or somebody comes out off of IR and is healthy in the coming weeks, So when you go to add Khalil Herbert, keep in mind that you're going to at least try to keep him until week 8 to see how this plays out.
Yeah, and the key right now is DeAndre Swift is averaging 2 yards per carry, which is just atrocious. Now, we know their offensive line has not looked good. We know Caleb Williams has not looked good. But what happens when things don't look good? Coaches make a change, and they try to ignite a little bit of a spark. And like you mentioned with Indianapolis this week, if Herbert does get mixed in more, I mean, we saw what Aaron Jones did to them last week. The 2 weeks that follow that, they got the Rams, who are a mess right now, and then they've got Carolina after that as well. So, probably not someone that people are paying a whole lot of attention to. Like you said, if you can afford to wait, maybe do it. But if not, could be a good add.
Second guy we're going to talk about at the running back position is Jaylen Wright. This shouldn't be a surprise to anybody, right? He's one of the most athletic running backs. He's got all kinds of speed, and he's in this Miami offense. Raheem Mostert is already hurt, and they did give Achane 29 carries, including giving him all the work, 29 touches, including giving him all the work at the end of the game once it was kind of out of hand, right? They were getting blown out by the Bills, and they still continued to give him work instead of just letting Jaylen Wright get some run. But there was a little bit of this to Achane's game at the beginning of the season last year, right? He was out and then got 2 or 3 carries, and I was like, what's going on? Boom, Denver, and he exploded when they gave him a little bit more work. Raheem Mostert is going to be out this week. They're playing against Seattle, so I think they could be in a position where they're probably losing this game without Tua, and maybe they end up trying to get Jaylen Wright a little bit more involved than he was last week. So I think this is somebody that has had no production, has no track record, but that I think is worth a speculative add if you have a roster spot. And this is somebody that you could cut if he doesn't do anything, right? Because I don't think anybody's rushing to the waiver wire to get him. But nobody was rushing to the waiver wire to get Devon Achane last year either until he exploded, right? And then he was a big money add. So in this offense, this much speed and potential to spell Achane a little bit more than he did last week, I think is worth trying to get onto the end of your bench.
Yeah, and it's very clear that Miami saw something in Jaylen Wright because they created a pick out of thin air to trade up and get him in this year's draft. He's a great runner in zone schemes, which is what Miami likes to do. We talked about this earlier, how McDaniel is very good at calling running plays. So I think with his explosiveness, there's a good chance that if Mostert continues to miss time and they do want to avoid giving Achane 29 touches a game to keep their star healthy, that he could have some very productive weeks. And if Achane misses time, Mostert's banged up. This guy is wheels up. You're going to be hearing analysts everywhere saying, 50% fab bids on this guy.
Jeff Wilson looked cooked this week. So if he's the only game in town, I really think he can be productive. So 5 carries, only 4 yards. I think maybe he just didn't have it in this game, and they decided to go away from him. I think there are games coming up where he could have it, and they just lean into him a little bit more. Moving to the wide receiver position, this one is pretty obvious, I think. But just to put it out there, in case he's available in your league, Josh Downs for the Indianapolis Colts, right? Young player. He was a rookie last year. He had very good chemistry with Anthony Richardson early in the year before Richardson went down. A lot of downfield work, and we've seen Alec Pierce kind of working in that role and have success so far through 2 weeks. And I think Josh Downs is going to come in and play on the outside and, kind of take over some of that production. And I think he can be even better than Pierce has been. So overall, I think Josh Downs is somebody that you really want to get on your team. He is off the injury report going into this weekend. And this is somebody that I think can take over right away and is only 35% rostered. If you can get him onto the end of your bench, this is somebody that I think has season-long value. And if he does go for, 3 for 50 and a score, say in this game, I do think that he's going to be the number one waiver priority going into next week. So this is the guy that I would be trying to add of this entire group for this week.
And other than, the few deep passes that Anthony Richardson has connected on, he has not necessarily looked that great as a passer. You mentioned earlier the rapport that Josh Downs has with Anthony Richardson, albeit last season was a very small sample size. He and Pittman were pretty much equal in terms of production. I think Downs may have even out-targeted Pittman, so he definitely has a level of trust with him. I think that Shane Steichen, after last weekend against Green Bay is going to have to take a kind of a look in the mirror and figure out what's going to be working for this offense. And I think if he has a reliable option in downs, I think they're going to continue to try to feed him. So I think this is a very, very good pickup. Unfortunately, I had to cut him in our league. I just had some roster management that I needed to sort out with a couple guys that are now going to be missing time, but we're just not able to keep them on IR. So we'll see how that works out for our opponent. But yeah, definitely would pick up downs.
Yeah, you had Wright as well, and you had to cut him because of roster crunch issues. So that's why I love the 6 bench option in your SuperFlex leagues. If you have 8 bench, like you wouldn't have had to cut either of these guys, right? And then there's no turnover on the wire. There's no real beat the waiver wire advantages because there's so many more guys owned. So I do like kind of cutting down on the bench and really making these end of roster decisions tough with these guys that are between 35 and 50% owned. Going on to the tight end position. This one, I'm going to lose a lot of you guys. I might have lost you on this one, Matt, but it's Tavion Sanders, the rookie tight end for the Carolina Panthers. So he's been splitting with Tommy Tremble, which, a little bit, Tremble's more of a blocker, I think, and Sanders has been getting on the field a little bit more. But with the switch to Andy Dalton, I really think that there's going to be a ceiling now in this passing game that just wasn't existent before this. So if Andy Dalton does look for Sanders kind of as his passing down tight end, they do have Deontay Johnson and Adam Thielen on the outside. So I think a lot of the targets are going to go there. A majority of the plays are going to go there. When they have Jonathan Brooks back, I think he's going to be involved in the passing game as well. But I do think there is an opportunity here for Sanders to take on more of a role than he has, right? He only has 3 targets through the first 2 games. He has been completely irrelevant, but I think over the next 3 or 4 weeks, we might get a better idea of how ready he is to take over. And at this point in the season last year, nobody was talking about Trey McBride, right? It was like he could be something if Zach Ertz steps aside type of thing. And Sanders now, I think he could have a chance anyways to be somewhat productive. And if you play in a tight end premium league, or if you're really hurting at tight end, this could be a decent speculative path.
Yeah. So when I was drafting a bunch of my best ball teams, he was actually a tight end that I was targeting very late, because what do you look for with tight ends? You want a young, athletic tight end as a potential breakout, much like Sam Laporta, much like Trey McBride that you mentioned. So I think that this is actually a very good call out. And now that I'm thinking about it a little bit more, I do like it a little bit more. But like you said, with the change at quarterback, we should see a much more efficient offense going forward. And he's the type of guy where I think, you don't necessarily have to add him this week, maybe not even the next week, but keep him on your watch list and watch how much more he gets acclimated into the offense, because, he does have a ceiling with his athletic profile. I think this team has made a push to get younger and more athletic. So I think he's someone that, as the season goes on, and look at the tight end position this year, right? Like we all thought this was the golden year. If you pick him up and he's 3 for 30 yards, like what difference is that between him and Sam Laporta right now?
Yeah.
I know that's ridiculous to say, but like, it's worth trying to get these young athletic guys on your team. And similar to like a Ben Sinnott too, like maybe he's someone we want to be thinking out as well, kind of a similar type profile. But yeah, tight end's a mess right now.
Yeah, and Sinnott would have been an interesting option. I just have such little faith in Jayden Daniels.
Yeah,
the fact that he can't even get his receivers the ball, right? It's kind of like Bryce Young. Like I wouldn't have put Sanders on this list if Bryce Young was continuing to start, because I just have no faith whatsoever in the passing game. And I feel that way a little bit with Jayden Daniels. Like I just don't think Ben Sinnott is going to be the one that kind of emerges when he can't even get the ball to McLaurin. He's struggling with Noah Brown. Luke McCaffrey is winning on a lot of his routes, doesn't get him the ball. Zach Ertz is in front of him right now. So I guess there is that comparison with McBride last year. But that's why I decided to go with Sanders in this video, because I don't think Tremble is going to take the passing game work from him.
Yeah.
And I do have hope that, and we just saw Tyler Conklin go 5 for 95. So I guess that could have been the beat the waiver wire guy if we had done this before that Thursday night game. But I do think that there's an opportunity here for him to exceed those 1 and 2 targets he saw in those first 2 weeks. So look for him to get 4 or 5 targets this week. See if he can do anything with it. See if he's involved at all in the red zone. See if his snap percentage expands at all with Dalton behind center.
And just a side thought with Carolina, sorry to cut you off there. If you are in a league where this guy obviously would not be a waiver wire ad, but if someone is super down on Deontay Johnson at this point because he has done nothing and Carolina has sucked, he's someone that I would try to potentially make a low ball trade for, because if this offense does click, we know that, he's a great separator, that all these XYZ things can happen for him to definitely outplay what he has been now. So I know it's not a waiver wire guy, but if he's someone that you've got your eye on, try to make a trade for him this week if you can.
And then the last position we're going to talk about here is DST. So I will start this segment by saying beat the waiver wire specifically. If somebody dropped the Dallas Cowboy defense this week, they go up against the Ravens. It's not likely. They're 91% rostered on Sleeper, so it's very unlikely. But if they did, go take a peek at that, because I might just add them over anybody that we've talked about if you have that open roster spot, if you've been hit with IR or you've been hit with injuries, right, and your IR is full and you kind of just are sitting there like, dude, well, should I take a shot on any of these guys? But Dallas is sitting out there. Just go ahead and pick them up 1 week early, right? And you're going to be starting them Thursday against the Giants next week. So that's the first defense I wanted to highlight. Not very likely that they're available, but just in case that did happen, I do still think that they should be 100% owned and kind of stashed for next week. The main team I wanted to talk about for next week, and I expect that they're still going to be available in most leagues next week because they're only 26% owned right now, is the Miami Dolphins defense. They weren't very good against Jacksonville. They held them to 17 points, so they did okay, but not very much. And then they were obviously atrocious against Buffalo. They got scorched. And then they play Seattle this week, who Seattle's offense is looking very good. I do not expect them to have a very good game this week against Seattle. But the following week, they play against Tennessee. And that's a team I think that is a little bit more beatable, especially with a poorer quarterback, I guess, than the first three teams that they're going to have played with Will Levis. And there's a chance here, obviously, that they get going a little bit and they can really make an impact against Tennessee. So I do think that they're going to be the top streaming option that week. And if you can get them a week early, I would recommend doing that with the Dolphins.
Yeah, that's a good point. If a lot of these guys aren't available, or if you know your league and someone's going to drop like a $5 fab bid on the top defense each week or even higher, we've seen sometimes, like, go ahead and get in front of that, because those dollars are precious. Like, I know $5 here and there doesn't seem like a lot, but you want that money at the end of the year. So if you can get ahead of that, go ahead and do it.
That's a good point. Don't spend fab on defenses. I mean, you can every once in a while, but like, I guess this past week, right, if the Browns were available and they have a good matchup, like $1 or $2 is okay. Don't spend 15% fab on a defense. We saw that in our home league this week. And I was like, dude, what are you doing? Like, you're obviously going to get them for like 6 or 7. You don't have to go to 15. There's no reason to be spending that kind of money on a defense at all, right? It's more valuable to stream, get ahead of your weekly defenses instead of spending fab. This goes back to the fab video, that I did, talking about how roster spots have innate value, right? That they are more valuable than spending just a bunch of money on a player that you might end up having to cut or doesn't end up being worth that roster spot, because you want to add a second defense, right, for beat the waiver wire type thing. So don't be spending a ton of your fab on defenses. Just try and beat the waiver wire instead. All right. And with that, thank you so much for watching. We look forward to see you guys in the next one.